Selina kneeled on the cold marble floor, the room silent except for the echo of her heart pounding in her chest. Eat on the floor. You're not worthy of a seat at this table. Henry Carter's voice cut through the still air, his words sharp, his eyes full of disdain. She could feel the sting of their judgment, but she didn't move, didn't flinch. Every ounce of her wanted to scream, to throw it all back in their faces, but she stayed still, her breath shallow, calm. The plates were set before her, the cold edges mocking her, but Selina wasn't here to back down. She had a secret, one that could tear their world apart. And they had no idea. You don't know who you're messing with, she whispered to herself, just as Henry stepped closer, unaware of the storm about to hit. Selina's hands trembled as she wiped down the glass, the rag worn thin from years of use. The sharp smell of bleach lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of expensive perfume that lingered in the hallway. The contrast was jarring. She, dressed in a faded uniform, the thick soles of her shoes scraping against the cold marble floor while the family she worked for lived in luxury. Her eyes flicked to the hallway, the large windows overlooking a city she'd never have the chance to live in. The view was one of a life she could only imagine. She'd always been good at imagining things. Dreams were easier to hold on to than reality. The clink of silverware in the dining room reminded her of how far away her dreams seemed. Each day was the same. Scrub the floors, clean the windows, and stay out of the way. They never saw her. Never saw how her knees ached by the end of every shift. How her hands cracked raw from harsh chemicals. But they never noticed. No one ever noticed. The room was always cold, despite the expensive heating system. Cold like the eyes of the people who passed her by, pretending she didn't exist. But today was different. There was something about this place. The sharp scent of the polished wood, the gleam of the brass doorknobs. It was all a reminder of everything she didn't have. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against the small crumpled piece of paper she carried with her. A simple note from her mother, words she read every night before bed. Hold your head high and never let them see your shame. The words had become her mantra. But today it felt harder to breathe. The door to the study opened and the CO Henry stepped into the hall. She quickly turned, smoothing her uniform, looking down at the floor, pretending she hadn't seen him. It was safer that way. But Henry's voice stopped her in her tracks. Selina, he said, his tone softer than usual. She didn't look up. She never looked up. How long are you planning to keep this up? He asked, eyes scanning her figure. He probably didn't expect an answer, but there was one sitting just beneath her ribs. As long as I have to. She kept the words locked behind her teeth, her mouth dry. Instead she said, I'm just doing my job, sir. He snorted. Your job? Right. How long do you plan on staying in this place? Or is this it for you? She knew what he meant, and her heart sank. People like him, people with power, only ever saw the surface. They didn't see what it took to survive. They didn't see the cracks in her hands, the hunger in her stomach some nights. But they didn't have to. Her dignity, her pride was all she had left. I don't need much, she said, the words coming out quieter than she intended. Just enough to do my work and keep my head high. There was a moment of silence before Henry muttered something she didn't catch. His footsteps fading as he returned to his office. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, but the knot in her chest remained. She turned back to the window, her eyes tracing the skyline that would always be just out of her reach. She had made peace with that. But there was one thing she couldn't make peace with. The idea that the people she worked for, the people who lived in this golden cage, would never truly understand the price of their comfort. They would never know the sweat it took to get them there. And that, Selina knew, was the true tragedy. The grand estate loomed in front of Selina like a fortress, tall, unyielding, and cold. She stood outside the sprawling gates, the sound of the heavy metal clanging behind her as the guards locked them shut. Inside, the marble floors gleamed under the harsh, sterile lighting of the executive offices. The walls lined with expensive art that had no connection to the world Selina knew. As she made her way through the hallways, the hum of quiet conversations and the soft shuffle of polished shoes echoed through the open spaces. A gala was in full swing on the top floor, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses made the walls seem even colder. Inside the ballroom, the CEOs and high-profile investors were gathered, all draped in designer suits, all with smiles sharp enough to cut glass. They spoke in tones that dripped with ease, casual in a way that felt rehearsed, as if the world outside these walls didn't exist. "Where's the new investment report?" Henry Carter's voice rang out from the far side of the room, dismissing the group of executives around him with a wave of his hand. One of the assistants scrambled to get him what he asked for, her face flush with nervousness. Henry didn't notice. His gaze swept the room, landing on one of the art pieces. The scene was effortless, the power palpable, and the divide between them and the staff was a chasm too wide to cross. Selina, on the other hand, moved in the shadows as she always did. Her uniform was a dark contrast to the bright attire of the upper echelon, but it was the only uniform she could afford. She passed by the glittering guests, not a single person sparing her a glance, as if she didn't even exist in their world. The air was different here, heavy with the scent of expensive whiskey and the sharp edge of artificial conversation. No one looked at her, no one acknowledged her presence. But the distance wasn't just physical, it was in the way they moved, in the way they spoke, as if the world outside their bubble was irrelevant. Selina knew better than to try and get noticed. She'd learned quickly that the more invisible she was, the safer she'd be. The staff weren't meant to be seen, only heard when needed. Her mind flashed back to the earlier hours, when she had been in the kitchen, wiping down counters, scrubbing dishes, barely a word exchanged with anyone. The last time someone had tried to speak to her, it had been a simple request for more ice, a gesture that barely masked the irritation in the voice. She was nothing here, a shadow moving between worlds that didn't touch. In this place, no one cared who she was, what she knew, or how much potential she held. All that mattered was what she could do for them, and even that was a fleeting moment of relevance, erased as soon as the task was complete. As she passed by the open doors to the ballroom, she couldn't help but look in. Henry stood at the center, surrounded by people whose faces were familiar to her only in passing. He was smiling, talking with ease, his arms casually slung over the shoulders of investors who hung on his every word. A small part of her wondered if they even realized how easily he dismissed the very people who made this world possible, the people like her. She shook the thought from her head. This was their world, not hers. It had never been hers. Selina's hands shook slightly as she picked up the discarded folder from the conference room table, the papers inside a jumbled mess of financial reports. She'd been here for hours doing the usual cleaning, picking up after the people who thought the world was theirs. She didn't expect anyone to notice, nor did she care. It was the way of things, the way she had learned to survive. But today it was different. She had overheard enough in the past few weeks, enough to know that the merger Henry was pushing forward could bring disaster. She had been filing papers in the corner when she heard him speak about the contracts, about the clauses no one would notice until it was too late. He had laughed it off, dismissing any real concern. But Selina knew better. The room was still, the only sound the rustle of the papers she was organizing. Her eyes darted across the room. No one was paying attention. No one ever did. But her stomach twisted in a way she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about business, it was about lives. People would lose their homes, their jobs, all for the sake of a contract that was designed to protect the rich while leaving everyone else exposed. The words on the paper were clear. If the deal went south, the company would carry the burden, not the investor. But Henry didn't care. He was too far removed from the reality of what was at stake. And there she was, just a maid, no one of importance, but for a fleeting moment, she felt a rush of something stronger than fear, responsibility. The risk was undeniable. She could stay silent. She could keep cleaning and just walk away like she always had. No one would ever know she saw the truth, or if she did, that she understood it. But something inside her wouldn't let it go. The next time Henry strode into the room, his brisk, authoritative voice echoed off the walls. He was talking about the merger again, his back to the door, unaware that Selina was standing just behind it. She could hear the pride in his tone, the belief that he was invincible. It was like a slap in the face, as if all the years of cleaning, of watching from the sidelines, had been leading up to this moment. "Selina," he called without turning around, as if she were invisible, "get me that report on the M&A final draft. And don't be slow about it." Her heart pounded in her chest, a deep ache in her bones as she moved toward the table. She knew what she had to do. The words slipped from her mouth before she had the chance to stop them. Sure, I think you need to look at the clauses in the contract. Henry turned, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? You're just here to clean, Selina. He sneered, as if the very idea of her having any insight was absurd. Don't interfere in things you don't understand. He made his way toward her, his steps confident, yet something about the way he looked at her made her stand her ground. Selina swallowed hard, her voice quieter but resolute. I understand enough. The clause you're about to sign puts the entire company at risk, and you'll be the one left standing, while everyone else loses everything. There was a tense pause as Henry's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking between the papers and her face. The other executives in the room were suddenly silent, all eyes on Selina, their expressions a mix of disbelief and amusement. No one had ever dared to challenge Henry like this. Who do you think you are? He spat, the words cold as ice. You think you know better than the experts in this room? His tone was condescending, dripping with arrogance, but Selina didn't flinch. She felt a fire in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Courage. The risk was enormous. If she was wrong, if she misjudged this, it would cost her everything. Her job, her reputation, everything. But she couldn't stay silent. I don't know better, she said, her voice shaking only slightly. But I know this deal will destroy your company if you sign it. It's built to protect them, not you. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Henry's face reddened, his jaw tightening. He took a slow step toward her, the weight of his presence heavy in the air. For a moment she thought he might shout, maybe fire her on the spot. But instead he laughed, a low mocking sound. You're lucky you're even allowed in this room, Selina. Do you really think your opinion matters? He gestured to the executives, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or to protest. Get her out of here, Henry ordered, his voice low and dangerous. I don't need this kind of interference. The security guards, who had been standing by the door, moved toward Selina, but she didn't move. She stood her ground. If you sign that deal, she said one last time, her voice firm, you'll regret it. The guards hesitated for a moment, but Selina had already turned and walked out, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. As she passed the grand hall, she could hear Henry's voice behind her, but she didn't look back. The risk had been taken. She had done something no one expected. The future, however, was uncertain. The hallway felt colder than usual as Selina walked back from the conference room, her steps echoing against the polished floors. Her heart was still racing, her breath shallow, and the weight of what she had just done sank into her bones. She had spoken out, but the taste of victory was bitter. There was no going back now. The entire building felt like it was closing in on her. She had dared to speak up, to challenge the very foundation of their world, and now there was no escape from the consequences. As she rounded the corner, she saw Henry standing by the elevator, his back straight, his eyes cold as ice. He didn't even need to speak. The anger in his gaze was enough. His hand clenched into a fist, the veins in his neck throbbing with barely contained fury. Selina, he said, his voice tight. What the hell do you think you're doing? You think you have the right to question me? To stand in front of my board and lecture me like I'm some kind of fool? His words cut through the air like a knife, and for a moment, Selina thought she might choke on the tension. Her hands balled into fists at her sides, but she didn't move. She couldn't. I wasn't lecturing you, sir, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but her eyes were steady. I was just trying to make sure. You don't get to try anything, he snapped, his voice rising. You're nothing but a maid. Who the hell do you think you are? Talking about business you have no right to understand. Selina flinched, the sting of the word nothing cutting deep into her chest. She tried to hold her ground, but the pressure was suffocating. The air around her grew colder, heavier, as if every breath she took was a weight on her shoulders. The elevator doors slid open behind him, but she couldn't move. Get in the elevator, Selina, Henry ordered, his tone clipped. We're going to talk to HR. Now. The words hit her like a slap. She had known there would be consequences, but she hadn't expected this. She had hoped for some kind of acknowledgement, even if it was just a hint of respect. Instead, she was being treated like a child, an inconvenience. She swallowed hard, stepping into the elevator behind him. The doors slid shut with a soft thud, and the silence that followed was deafening. Henry stood with his back to her, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. The elevator moved slowly, each second dragging on like an eternity. She could feel his anger radiating off of him, and it felt like it was pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? What was left to say? She was already in too deep. She had crossed a line and there was no turning back. You've made a serious mistake, Henry said, breaking the silence. His voice was colder than before, sharper. I don't know what gave you the impression that you could challenge me, but you've just put yourself in a very bad position. Do you understand that? Selina nodded slowly, though her mind was racing. She didn't regret what she had done, but the weight of the consequences was starting to hit her all at once. She had known this could happen. She had known it could all fall apart. But standing here now, in the face of his anger, the fear started to creep in. She wasn't stupid. She knew what this meant. The elevator reached the top floor, and the doors opened to reveal a sterile, cold hallway lined with offices. Henry stepped out first and Selina followed, her heart pounding in her chest. As they walked toward the HR office, she could feel the eyes of the employees around her, their gazes heavy with judgment. She could feel their whispers even though she couldn't hear them. She was the maid, the one who had stepped out of line. She was the one who had dared to speak to someone like Henry as if they were equals. And now she was going to pay for it. When they reached the HR office, Henry turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Wait here, he said, and she stood frozen as he entered the room. She could hear his voice rising inside, his words muffled but full of anger. The HR manager was the only person in the building who would even consider listening to her side of things, but she knew it wouldn't matter. Never did. They would take Henry's side. They always did. She leaned against the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps, her hands pressed against the cool surface. She had done the right thing. She had tried to stop something that could have destroyed everything. But now she was going to lose it all, her job, her dignity, everything she had fought for. Selina. A voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see the HR manager standing in the doorway, his face grim. Henry stood behind him, his arms crossed, watching her with cold eyes. Come in, the HR manager said. Selina followed him. Into the room, her feet heavy with each step. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her fate. Henry spoke first. This is the problem, he said, his voice smooth and icy. This is the person who thinks she can challenge me. The one who thinks she knows better than anyone else. I'm done with her. Selina's stomach twisted. She tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. She could feel the pressure building in her chest, like her lungs were closing in. Henry continued, his voice unwavering. I don't care if she's worked here for years. I don't care about her good intentions. She crossed the line. She doesn't belong here anymore. The HR manager nodded, a look of discomfort in his eyes. We'll handle it, Mr. Carter. Good, Henry said, his gaze finally locking with hers. You're lucky I'm not having you escorted out right now. Consider this your last warning, Selina. The finality in his words hit her like a physical blow. She had known this was coming, but hearing it from him, hearing the cold dismissal in his voice, made her feel small, insignificant. She wanted to scream, to tell him everything she knew, to show him just how much power she held. But the words wouldn't come. She was nothing now. You're dismissed, Henry said, his voice final. Selina turned and left the room without a word, her steps slow, her head held high despite the crushing weight of failure. She had tried. She had done what she thought was right. But in the end it had cost her everything. Selina stepped outside, the cool air wrapping around her like a shroud, and for the first time in hours she exhaled, the weight on her chest lifting just a little. The rain had started again, soft at first, then heavier, the droplets tapping against her skin like small hands urging her to move, but she didn't. She stood there watching the world blur around her, the streets glistening under the streetlights. Her shoes sank into the wet pavement, the water seeping through the soles, cold against her skin, but she didn't care. The hum of the city felt distant now, muffled by the pounding of her own heart. The office behind her, The towering walls, the cold glass had felt like a cage. It wasn't just the building. It was everything inside of it. The power. The money. The endless movement of people who always knew exactly where they were going. They lived in a world she could never truly be a part of. Yet here she was on the other side of those walls, the rain soaking her hair. The weight of the moment pressing on her. She had done the right thing. She knew that. But that didn't make it easier. She stared down at her hands, the fingers still trembling from the pressure, from the risk she had taken. She thought about the papers, the way they had slipped from her fingers earlier, the weight of the truth buried in them, and how no one would ever see it. How it would never matter. Her breath fogged in the air, the chill of the night creeping into her bones. The cold felt good against the heat rising in her chest, the bitterness that burned her throat. It felt like everything inside her had been torn open, raw and exposed. And yet she still stood there, still breathing. The rain began to fall harder, the sound of it against the pavement louder, but she didn't move. She didn't need to. There was something in the quiet, in the cold, in the way the world seemed to pause around her, that made everything slow down, make sense in a way that was too simple, too honest. She wasn't part of their world. She had never been. But she had something they didn't. Something that kept her standing, even in the darkest of moments. Her gaze drifted upward, watching the city fade into the fog, the lights blurry, distant. There was no way to explain the feeling in her chest, the knot that twisted tighter each time she thought about going back. Going back to the endless hours, the cold floors, the people who never saw her. But it was also the only thing she knew. It was the only place that still felt like it belonged to her. The sound of her phone vibrating in her pocket pulled her out of the fog, but she didn't check it. The text could wait. Right now, the rain and the night were all she had, and that was enough. For a moment she closed her eyes, letting the rain fall over her, the cool drops soothing against her skin. "You're not invisible," she whispered, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. Her breath misted in the air as the words lingered. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she had any fight left. But she knew one thing. She wasn't invisible. Not anymore. Selena was almost home when her phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it immediately. The night air was colder now, biting against her skin, but she kept walking, letting the rhythm of her steps keep her focused. Her thoughts were still a storm, what she had said earlier, what had happened in the HR room, the way Henry had looked at her like she was nothing. And yet, in that instant, she had known something had shifted. She had no idea what would come next, but the weight on her shoulders had somehow lightened. Then the phone buzzed again. Her heart skipped. She pulled it out and saw the name. Henry Carter. Her breath hitched, but she pressed the green button anyway, raising the phone to her ear. "Selena," Henry's voice was low, sharp. "I need to see you. Now." His tone was different this time. No longer condescending or dismissive. It was tight, urgent. "Where are you?" She glanced around, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement, the quiet of the night settling over her. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice unsteady, but she was already walking toward the direction of the office building. She had no idea what to expect, but something told her that whatever was about to happen would change everything. "Just get here. And don't make me wait," Henry said before hanging up. Selena's pulse raced as she made her way back. The building felt different now, looming in front of her as she approached the entrance, the same cold, gleaming glass now seeming less imposing and more like a trap. She pushed open the doors, the familiar scent of disinfectant and polished wood filling her senses. The lights inside flickered for a second, a strange momentary glitch that sent a shiver up her spine. She stepped inside, and there at the center of the lobby was Henry. He wasn't alone. Standing beside him was the HR manager, but there was something about the way they both looked at her that made her stop in her tracks. "Selena," Henry said again, but this time there was something more in his voice, a hint of something she couldn't place. He nodded toward the HR manager, and she stepped forward. "We need to talk." The HR manager gestured for her to follow them, and they led her to a small, private meeting room. The door clicked shut behind her. Henry didn't sit at the head of the table like usual. Instead, he stood by the window, staring out into the dark night. The tension in the room was thick, heavy, palpable. The HR manager cleared his throat. "We've reviewed your claims. And we've found something that you should have seen. What do you mean? Selena's voice caught in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. What exactly are you talking about? The HR manager pushed a file across the table toward her. It was thick, filled with papers she'd never seen before. She hesitated for only a moment before she opened it. The first few pages were familiar, documents she'd seen before. But the last page caught her attention. It was a memo written by Henry himself, detailing the very clauses she had warned him about earlier. The ones that would put the entire company at risk. But this wasn't the part that stunned her. It was the second part of the memo. The part about Selena. Her eyes widened. The memo was marked confidential. But it wasn't just about the deal, it was about her. About what she had done, about how she had known what no one else had known. The company's legal team had missed it. The investors had missed it. But she hadn't. She hadn't just been cleaning. She had been listening, observing, learning. It was like a key turning in her mind. She had been more than just a maid. She was the one who had seen the danger. The one who had found the trap that no one else had bothered to notice. Henry had known it all along. He had known she was more than what she seemed. And now he was looking at her differently. For the first time, he wasn't looking down at her. He was respecting her. The HR manager didn't seem surprised. But the tension in his eyes told a different story. We've been watching you, he said quietly. We didn't realize what you were capable of until now. Selena's breath caught in her throat. You knew? She asked, her voice shaking, the shock of it all sinking in. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you help me? Henry turned, his gaze intense, his voice low but steady. Because Selena. You were right. His eyes softened for just a moment. A brief flicker of something human in them. I was blind. I never saw what you saw. But you saw the truth, didn't you? He stepped toward her slowly, his presence now commanding. There was a shift in the room. An unmistakable one. For the first time he was the one being humble, and she was the one standing tall. You've been here for a reason, he continued, his tone quiet but heavy with meaning. I need someone like you on my team. The HR manager nodded. But Selena couldn't take her eyes off Henry. His words hit her like a punch in the gut. She had been nothing before. Just a maid, just a shadow in the background. But now everything had changed. Now, the very man who had humiliated her was offering her a seat at the table. The realization was both sweet and bitter. She didn't know if she could trust him. She didn't know if she wanted to be a part of their world. But she knew this. She had earned her place. And that was worth more than anything he could ever offer. I'll think about it, Selena said quietly, her voice strong now, unwavering. The shift had happened. She had taken back her power. And Henry knew it. The game had changed. And she wasn't about to lose. You do that, he said, a small, approving smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The silence that followed spoke volumes. There was no going back now. The rain had stopped by the time Selena reached the small cafe around the corner from the building. The air felt fresh, clean, and her footsteps echoed softly against the wet pavement as she walked inside. She wasn't sure what brought her here. Perhaps it was the desire to feel something different, something that was just for her. The warmth inside the cafe wrapped around her like a blanket. She ordered her usual, a cup of black coffee, and found a seat by the window. The world outside seemed distant. A blur of motion and colors, while inside, everything was still. The past few days had been a whirlwind. She had taken risks, said things she never thought she would. And yet here she was, sitting in this quiet cafe, sipping on something simple. She could feel the weight of it all starting to lift, like a fog that had been clinging to her for far too long. The door opened, a small bell ringing as someone stepped inside. Selena didn't look up at first, lost in her thoughts until she heard the voice. Selena. She turned. It was Henry. He stood by the door, looking almost hesitant, as if unsure whether he should take another step. His usual confident posture was gone, replaced by something more human. He was holding a small, folded piece of paper in his hand, his eyes meeting hers with a sincerity she hadn't expected. For a moment, the silence between them was thick. He took a slow breath before speaking again. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice quieter than usual, the weight of the words hanging between them. I treated you like you were nothing. Like your opinion didn't matter. I was wrong. Selina felt a strange shift in her chest, a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't name. She had expected him to come in with more of the same arrogance, maybe even an offer she didn't want. But this was different. Henry stepped forward, taking a seat across from her, the small piece of paper still in his hand. It was then she realized it was the memo, the one that had started everything. He placed it gently on the table between them. You were right, he continued. I didn't listen to you, but I should have. You saw something no one else did. And that's something I can't ignore. He leaned back in his chair, looking at her not with authority, but with something closer to respect. I was so caught up in my own world, I didn't see what was right in front of me. Selina didn't know what to say. She could feel the familiar weight of his gaze, but this time it didn't feel heavy. Felt lighter. He wasn't expecting anything from her, just acknowledging what had happened. I know I can't change the way things went, but I want you to know, I see you now, he said quietly, the words simple, but somehow carrying more meaning than all the business jargon they had ever exchanged. She wasn't sure how to respond. All these years she had been invisible to him, to everyone around her. Now for the first time she wasn't just seen, she was heard. She took a slow breath, watching him carefully. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, not really. He was just being real. And that was enough. Thank you, she said softly, her voice steady. It wasn't the grand gesture of revenge or redemption she might have imagined. It wasn't a dramatic turning point, but something quieter, more profound. She didn't need him to apologize. She didn't need anything from him except this simple moment of understanding. As he sat there, waiting for her response, Selina realized that this wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. The dignity she had fought for, the quiet strength she had carried, had always been hers, no matter how they had treated her. I'm not looking for anything, Henry, she said, looking him in the eye. But I know what I'm worth now. The weight of her own words felt like a release, a soft exhale after holding her breath for so long. For the first time she didn't feel like she was the one waiting for someone to notice. She had noticed herself. Henry nodded slowly, a slight smile on his lips. I respect that. He paused, then added, You deserve better than what I gave you. I won't forget that. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was quiet in a way that felt right. No more grand gestures. No more apologies. Just two people in a quiet moment knowing they had changed. When he stood to leave, Selina didn't get up. She stayed in her seat, letting the stillness fill her. It wasn't the end of everything, but it was the beginning of something. Something that had nothing to do with what he could offer, and everything to do with what she had already found in herself. As the door clicked shut behind him, she sat there for a while, the last sip of her coffee warm against her lips, and the city outside moving on as it always did. But inside she was different. She was finally free. The cafe was quiet again. The rain had stopped, but the streets outside were still slick with water, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. Selina sat alone by the window, her hands folded on the table, the empty coffee cup in front of her, now cold. She watched the people pass by, their figures blurred in the distance, moving with purpose, with places to be. The world was still turning, but it felt like everything had slowed down. The door opened softly, the bell above it chiming gently. She glanced up, but it wasn't Henry, just a couple laughing as they stepped inside. The light from the street lamp outside flickered for a moment, casting a soft glow across the room. She turned back to the window, the world outside now more distant than ever. She didn't feel the need to rush. Her reflection in the glass was still steady. The sound of her own breath was the only thing she could hear, the only thing that mattered now. She didn't look away. For the first time in a long time there was no need to. Outside, the city kept moving, bright lights, rushing cars, and footsteps echoing down the wet sidewalk. But inside everything was quiet. The world had shifted, but it was hers to move through now, at her own pace.